All right, so I have been listening to on Audible Extreme Punishment by Steven Epstein. I've had the paper copy for 2 years and I just don't pick it up because I'm tired by the time I get into bed. But it's been very interesting listening to Details by Steven Epstein, and I've really enjoyed. So I'm going to share just some of the insights that he just shared and what I was listening to. So first of all, Wendy, she was not originally employed at the Florida State School of Law. She was across the street. So let me show you that. So Wendy was employed by the Center for the Advancement of Human Rights. And this is what her office building looked like. It was an old home that had been converted into an office building. We've all seen that on a college campus. And apparently, she had a tiny office about the size of a closet. And apparently, just feet from her desk was a hot water heater. So, not only did Wendy have to look across the street at the beautiful College of Law, but she also knew Dan had this huge, nice office, and she was just in this house. But later on, she does end up at the College of Law. And you know who got her that job and who got her that office? You guessed it, Dan Markel. And do you know what else Dan Markel helped Wendy with? Her writings. So he would get published articles in elite law publications. But Wendy, her things got published in University of St. Thomas publications, which is a law school um, up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and also in the Journal of Transactional Law and Policy. But guess what? Dan was always helping Wendy. And funny enough, she would even thank him in the footnotes of her articles. Gosh, does this seem like the same husband who was so abusive and scary? Doesn't to me, not at all. Let's look up the 2025 best law schools with U.S. News and World Report. So we can see here we've got all the typical ones we would expect: Duke, Penn, UVA, Harvard, okay, where Dan graduated from. And then if you keep going, scrolling all the way down, almost to number 100, you get to the St. Thomas School of Law. That is where Wendy was published. So, yeah, I think she just seems to have forgotten who helped her get to where she was going. Also, while she was married to Dan, that College of Human Rights, her job was by funding. Well, the funds ran out, the grant money ran out, so she lost her job. Her job where she was making $35,000 a year. That's right, 35,000. But Dan got her a job at the law school. She got a nice big office, and she was making $85,000 when she got that job. And then that was in 2011. And then by 2013, she had a $100,000 salary. Then it was in the spring of 2014 that she was able to be selected to be a keynote speaker at Convocation. So that is where we've heard about the This Is Our Story, which, by the way, she self-published that book. She got piles, according to Stephen Epstein, of rejection letters. No publisher would pick it up. So she self-published it, and then Florida State asked every incoming freshman to read the book. Again, more Dan work, 7,000 copies for 7,000 freshmen. And that's when she was invited to be that keynote speaker. So convocation is just like a big, I call it like a big pep rally. That's probably not the appropriate term, but it's just to welcome the freshmen, pump them up about their new college. And she was asked in the spring of 2014 to do that. So 5 weeks later, she did not show up. She did not do it. 5 weeks after Dan was murdered. Now, you will remember in one of the interviews with Jeff Lacoste, he talks about how Wendy was so disappointed that she wouldn't get to speak. But I'm not sure, was that her choice or was that Florida State's choice? Because to me, what better way to honor your ex-husband who was murdered than just to come to convocation, welcome the freshmen? Um, I don't know. I've kind of found that interesting, but so Dan was shot July 18th. So then 5 weeks later was convocation with all the freshmen there in August. And Epstein said that, yeah, the Adelsons, they were nowhere to be found because we all know they were in Miami. And speaking of Miami, so this is a question that comes up often. And it's always, Wendy brings it up usually, I think pretty much in every trial she's testified in, about Dan and the offer he had at University of Miami Law School. So Steven Epstein actually did an interview or was on a podcast a while back, and he does talk about in his first year teaching at Florida State, Dan was offered a position at the University of Miami Law School. He wound up teaching there in a look-see visitor position in the fall of 2006. And he says, by a whisker thin vote against him, he was denied a position on the permanent faculty. It's interesting. Wendy had a full year position there. She stayed. Dan went back to Tallahassee to teach at Florida State, licking his wounds and moving on, not having gotten that job. And the person that I spoke to, and that's Stephen Epstein talking, at the University of Miami remembers that vote vividly. He wakes up at night in a cold sweat because he knows that had the vote gone differently, this awful tragedy probably never would have happened because those grandchildren would have grown up within an hour's drive of Donna and Harvey Adelson. Something else that Stephen Epstein shared in this podcast, he says that Dan, in the first 4 years that he was at Florida State, he had three different offers. One was at Wash U in St. Louis, one at Miami, and then one at University of Houston. And he actually leveraged, this is in the book Extreme Punishment, he leveraged that offer at the University of Houston to get a substantial salary increase at Florida State. And then that also allowed, I guess it would that have been the dean? I can't remember the exact terminology. Um, they just did not want to lose Dan. So that is how Dan would leverage it and get Wendy those jobs at the law school. So she went from making 35,000, then up to 85,000, and then $100,000. The Houston offer was while Wendy was pregnant with Ben, and it just wasn't going to be the right time because Wendy did not want to take that job, even though it would have been her dream job at Houston. They offered her one as well. She did not want to do that because she would have been so far from her parents. Thank y'all for joining. I just thought this was some good little information from Steven Epstein. Finally got the University of Miami information all figured out, and I was just fascinated to see how she had thanked Dan Markel and all the different footnotes and different papers. And I did not know that until I heard Steven Epstein say that in the book. And of course, all the different jobs that Wendy held at Florida State. Nice work, Dan.
The state isn't going to decide to arrest me. Oh my God, I can't believe this.
I believe that the truth has a way of coming out.
Okay, so we think like he's not waking up. Like, is that?
There is enough circumstantial evidence there to infer that Wendy took affirmative steps to help further the conspiracy.